1989, in 1989, at the absolute height of the Cold War, three high-powered Western businessmen landed in Moscow with one goal: to buy the rights to a video game. None of them knew the others were there. Each of them was convinced they were the only ones who legally owned it, and they were about to walk straight into the headquarters of a Soviet state agency, surrounded by KGB surveillance, to negotiate with the totalitarian government. The game they were fighting over, it wasn't a military simulator or a high-tech spy game. It was about falling blocks. This is the story of Tetris, and it is the tale of an international espionage, massive corporate lies, $100 million legal battle, and a Soviet programmer who didn't make a single set of the most addictive game in human history. Today on Drama Radar, we are going behind the Iron Curtain to scan the greatest Cold War heist of all time. The year is 1994. Deep inside the Soviet Academy of Sciences in Moscow, a soft-spoken computer scientist named Alexei Pajitnov was working late. Pajitnov's job was to test the capabilities of a primitive Soviet computer called the Electrical 60. But to pass the time, he decided to program a simple game based on a childhood puzzle called Pentominos. He simplified the geometric pieces to 4 squares each, using the Greek word for 4, tetra. Combined it with his favorite sport, tennis. He called it Tetris. Because the computer couldn't render graphics, Pajitnov had to build the blocks out of text brackets. But the second he finished it, the game was a virus. Programmers in Moscow couldn't stop playing it. They copied it onto floppy disk and passed it around the Eastern Bloc. By 1997, the game had leaked out of the Soviet Union and landed in Hungary. And that is where a British software salesman named Robert Stein discovered it. Stein saw massive dollar signs. He sent a telex to Pajitnov offering to license the game for the West. Pajitnov sent a polite reply back saying he was interested. To Stein, that friendly, non-binding reply was a green light. Stein rushed back to the West immediately sold the PC rights to Microsoft and Spectrum Holobyte. They leaned hard into the Soviet aesthetic, packaging the game in bright red boxes with St. Bale's Cathedral on the front, calling it the Soviet Challenge. It was a massive hit. Millions of copies were selling, but there was a terrifying problem. Robert Stein didn't actually have a signed contract, and even worse, Pajitnov didn't even own the game. Under Soviet communist law, intellectual property didn't exist. Everything created by Soviet Union belonged to the state. And the Soviet government was about to find out that Western capitals were making millions off their game without paying them a single ruble. In 1989, In 1989, the video game world was about to change. Nintendo was secretly developing a revolutionary handheld device. the Game Boy. A Dutch American game publisher named Hank Rogers realized if Nintendo could bundle Tetris with every single Game Boy, they would conquer the world. But when Rogers tried to secure the handheld rights from Robert Stein, he got incredibly suspicious. It turned out Spain, Microsoft, and Atari were all trading, selling, and slicing up the rights to Tetris like a pie, even though none of them had a solid contract with the actual owners. LORG, the Soviet state agency in charge of tech experts. In February 1989, the tension boiled over. Three completely separate entities realized the paperwork was a mess and booked emergency flights to Moscow to secure the true rights. The head of LORG, a shrewd Soviet negotiator named Nikolai Belikov, played them like a fiddle. He put them in separate rooms, refusing to let them know they were competing against each other. But when Belikov sat down with Hank Rogers proudly showed them a copy of Tetris running on a Japanese Famicom console. We have never licensed Tetris for home consoles. This is illegal. Who gave you permission to do this? Rogers realized he was in deep trouble, but instead of lying, he was brutally honest. He explained the web of sub-licenses, saying it sold. Belikov was furious. He realized the Western businessmen had been treating LORG like fools. But Rogers did something the others didn't. He befriended Alexei Pajitnov. They sat down, talked about the game design, and bonded. But Pajitnov realized Rogers actually cared about the game, not the money. With Pajitnov's backing, Belikov handed Hank Rogers and Nintendo the ultimate prize: the exclusive worldwide handheld and console rights to Tetris. To clean up the mess, Belikov tricked Robert Stein into signing a highly specific Stein was so relieved to get something that he didn't even read the fine print. The new contract defined a computer so strictly that it completely stripped Stein, conceptually, Atari and Microsoft of any rights to put the game on home console. Nintendo had won, but Atari didn't know this yet. They had already spent millions manufacturing their own console version of Tetris under their Tengen brand. In late 1989, Nintendo dropped the hammer. They sued Atari for copyright infringement. The case went to a federal court in San Francisco. Atari argued that their sub-license from Stein was valid, but Nintendo brought out their secret weapon. Nikolai Belikov himself flew from Moscow to testify, carrying the original Soviet contracts. The judge ruled completely in Nintendo's favor. Atari was ordered immediately to stop selling the game. Over 500,000 physical cartridges of Atari's Tetris package, printed and ready to be sold, were pulled from store shelves, loaded onto trucks, and literally crushed into a landfill. Nintendo went on to launch the Game Boy with Tetris bundled inside. It sold over 35 million units, cementing the system as a legend. What about Alexei Pajitnov? Because of the Soviet regime, he didn't receive a single dollar from the millions of copies sold in the 80s and early 90s, but the story has a happy ending. In 1991, with the help of Hank Rogers, Pajitnov immigrated to the United States. In 1996, when the original 12-year agreement with the collapsing Soviet Union finally expired, the rights reverted back to him. Together, Rogers and Pajitnov founded the Tetris company. Today, Pajitnov finally gets the royalties he deserves for the game he built in his spare time. It is the ultimate story of how a game designed to test primitive Soviet hardware and bypass the Cold War, outsmarted massive media moguls, and conquered the globe. What is your highest score in Tetris? Let me know in the comments below. This is Drama Radar. We'll see you on the next scan.